After mounting pressure, tonight Kamala Harris will finally sit down for a formal interview, taking questions on CNN. She'll be joined by running mate Governor Tim Walz. It's been 37 days since her campaign began, and in that time, she's dodged demands for one-on-ones and has not held any press conferences. Harris is facing plenty of criticism for all of this and some concerns from supporters that she's only relied on rallies and teleprompters. Joining us now to discuss all of this, The Hill's congressional reporter Mychael Schnell. Mychael, this is a high-stakes moment for Harris. What does she need to do tonight, and what topics do you anticipate might be tricky for her?
Yeah, so this is just a really important evening and interview for a number of reasons. A, just off the top logistically, it's like you mentioned, the first interview that Harris is doing since she won the nomination. Now, the campaign could have chose to do, maybe one interview a week, a few interviews a week in the lead up and throughout her candidacy, but they didn't do that. So that sort of raises the anticipation and the focus on tonight's sit down. It's also going to be important because Harris has changed her views on a number of policy issues throughout her career in Washington, a dynamic that has become more pronounced since she took the nomination last month. For example, on things like fracking, EV mandates, mandatory buyback program for assault-style weapons. She's likely going to be asked about those policy changes and peppered with questions to nail down specifics on where she stands. So a lot of folks are going to be watching to see if they agree with her philosophy or not. So in a lot of ways, this is just going to be such a high-stakes interview for Kamala Harris, the first one since her nomination. A lot of folks going to be watching to see what she has to say this evening.
A lot of anticipation there. Now, a new Fox News poll shows Harris now leads Trump in 3 of 4 key Sunbelt states, making significant gains against Biden's number ahead of his exit from the race. Is this really a post-convention bump? What is changing voters' minds at this point?
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. A, it could be that post-convention bump, which we frequently do see. It's pretty conventional. And then I also think another thing could be is that we're still seeing the poll sort of calibrate and recalibrate and find its sea legs after Kamala Harris became the nominee following President Biden dropping out. That was such a rapid thing that happened, sort of political whiplash. And then right after that was the decision to pick Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate. And then right after that was the convention in Chicago. So it's sort of been go, go, go for this campaign, particularly the Harris campaign. So we're seeing polls finally shake out, take a breath, and see where things stand after really a whirlwind of a month, maybe 5 weeks of the campaign trail. But I definitely think a lot of that has to do with the convention. Look, I've spoken to a number of House Republicans who think that this is just a honeymoon period. We heard Speaker Mike Johnson himself say that this, quote, sugar high will end eventually. Folks think that after Labor Day, the polls will recalibrate and we'll have a better understanding of where this race stands because it won't be right after the Harris change. But nonetheless, it's a good sign right now for the Harris campaign. The big challenge for them now is going to be keeping up this momentum and enthusiasm up until Election Day.
Right. So many of these polls in Harris's favor. Now, Michigan and Wisconsin, 2 key battleground states, declined to remove RFK Jr.'s name from the general election ballots this November, despite his request and withdrawal from the race. Why won't they remove him, and what effect is this expected to have?
Yeah, so essentially when RFK Jr. said he was suspending his campaign and throwing his support behind Donald Trump, he said that he would seek to be taken off the ballots in swing states where his candidacy could make a difference on Election Day, but he would look to keep his name on solidly red or solidly blue states, not thinking it would have much of an impact. But now folks in Michigan and Wisconsin are saying that minor party candidates are not able to withdraw their names. For example, the senior press secretary for Michigan Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson said in a statement, quote, minor party candidates cannot withdraw, so his name will remain on the ballot in the November election. Now, this is really interesting because Michigan and Wisconsin, 2 very key swing states when you talk about control of the White House come November. And let's think about it. It's curious to know if some of the folks who are supporting RFK Jr. will still support him since his name will appear on the ballot in those states, or if they will follow in his lead and vote for former President Trump. Look, RFK Jr. was polling at very low numbers towards the end of his campaign, single-digit numbers. But when we talk about some of these swing states, they are so closely divided between Trump and Harris that it's entirely possible that some support for RFK Jr. could tank one of their campaigns. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this pans out and how the RFK Jr. and Trump folks react to this, because this was clearly not RFK Jr.'s plan all along.
We all know by now RFK Jr. has endorsed Trump, and earlier this week, the Trump campaign announced he will be part of the White House transition team if Trump is elected. Now, his family, RFK Jr.'s family, has had plenty to say on this, and we know his wife, actress Cheryl Hines, is a lifelong Democrat. What's her reaction to his Trump endorsement?
Yeah, RFK Jr. himself suggested that his wife Cheryl Hines is not thrilled with this Trump endorsement, saying she's, quote, has been, quote, the opposite of encouraging. This is the latest member of RFK's family to sort of express unhappiness with the endorsement of Trump. We saw that letter from a number of his siblings recently. Now we're seeing RFK Jr. himself say that his wife is not happy with the situation. He said, quote, "She's a lifelong Democrat, and the idea of me supporting Donald Trump was like I said, it was something that she would never have imagined, something she would have never wanted in her life. I think it causes her a lot of discomfort, and I'm very grateful to her for giving me support, but she was not somebody who was clamoring for this move. I would say the opposite is true." So just interesting right there, and especially fascinating that RFK Jr. is sort of the one documenting and detailing this bad blood back at home between him and his wife over the Trump endorsement. But nonetheless, he is going full steam ahead with his support for the former president.
All right, let's turn to another campaign headline. The Trump team is fighting to contain the fallout over his recent visit to Arlington National Cemetery. There is controversy over photos and video the campaign team may have taken of grave sites. Some are calling it disrespectful. Others say he actually might have broken the law. How is the Trump campaign defending this visit?
Yeah, we're essentially seeing the Trump campaign put the blame on other folks and not the campaign or the candidate themselves. The campaign coming out and saying that Arlington National, an official at Arlington National Cemetery, is actually the one who is responsible for this situation. Trump's campaign communications director, Stephen Chung, said there was no altercation as was described and suggested in some reports. He said, quote, "The fact is that a private photographer was permitted on the premises, and for whatever reason, an unnamed individual clearly suffering from a mental health episode decided to physically block members of President Trump's team during a very solemn ceremony." Interesting to see how this story continues to shake out, and as more details are reported. The New York Times did report last night that they spoke to a family member of one of the fallen soldiers whose grave was documented in Trump's photos, and those folks had expressed dismay with the fact that their family member was featured in the back of this. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this one pans out, and definitely not the headlines that former President Trump wants to be seeing as we get closer to Election Day.
Yeah, we'll definitely be seeing more coverage there. Now, House Judiciary Committee Chairman Jim Jordan is once again going after the judge who oversaw the Trump hush money trial in New York. He has issued a subpoena to the company that employs his daughter. What's Jordan after here?
Yeah, I think a lot of it's just as the Capitol Hill continuing to sort of be a defender of former President Trump as he faces these legal entanglements. His sentencing in that hush money case is coming up. It's going to be, right now at least, it's set for September. We'll see if it gets pushed back at all. But I think that this is just more, as we've seen, of House Republicans particularly launching different investigations and different investigative avenues in sort of veiled support of the former president to try to push back. So those legal entanglements, we've heard Republicans say time and time again that they see this as a weaponization of the federal government and weaponization of the Justice Department against former President Trump. So I think that this is exactly just more of that, more of them trying to contrast those allegations.
Other big news out of Washington, the Supreme Court has now blocked President Biden's student loan relief program. That's a major blow to one of his signature policy proposals. Michael, walk us through who will be impacted and what will this decision mean for those borrowers?
Yeah, so essentially what we saw come out of the Supreme Court is that it threw out the Biden administration's request to temporarily restate a new student debt plan. And the point of that student debt plan is to lower payments for millions of borrowers who would have to pay back from those student loans. So essentially what happened was the first phase of this began last October. It increased the amount of income that was protected by loan payments to 225% of the federal poverty line. That would not let any interest accrue. The second phase of this plan was supposed to begin in July. The plan would also shorten repayment periods to 10 years for qualifying buyers. And essentially, this would have affected 7.5 million borrowers who have already signed up for this plan, and 150,000 had their debt canceled under the new income-driven repayment plans. But there were two groups of Republican state attorneys general who had challenged this. The Supreme Court then stepping in. So we're going to have to see how the Biden administration responds and what the fate is, if there is any future or fate for the student debt repayment program. But essentially, not good news at the Supreme Court for the Biden administration.
Yes, the Supreme Court and the Biden administration don't see eye to eye on this issue at all. Now, thank you so much for all your time today. The Hill's congressional reporter, Mychael Schnell.
Thanks so much.
That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Margaret Chadbourn. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.